This is a new era for fighting Marines. Yesterday's large conventional operations against massed forces are being replaced by tactics directed against enemies who don't wear uniforms, who buy their weapons over the internet, and who are setting up in the hardest battlefield of all, the asymmetrical threat in the city. Project Metropolis of the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab is aggressively developing new training methods and capabilities to enhance our intelligence, communications, mobility, logistics, and fire support systems for urban warfare. Project Metropolis is conducting a series of experiments in the urban environment to get the street smarts we need to beat the enemy on their own turf. But as valuable as these experiments are, they do not include live fire events, scenarios that would quickly demonstrate that concealment does not equal cover. Researchers at the Naval Surface Warfare Center, Dahlgren, Virginia, under direction of Project Metropolis of the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab, recently conducted a series of live fire tests to demonstrate the effects of a variety of current weapon systems against typical structures found in the urban environment. A roofless 16 by 16 foot 3-room structure with standard 2x4 studded half-inch sheetrock interior walls and half-inch plywood exterior walls served as the laboratory. The front wall included a section for replaceable impact panels of brick and cinder block. These panels and the existing plywood exterior wall served as targets for the weapons fired straight on and at an angle of 45 degrees from a distance of 19 meters, about 60 feet, the average engagement distance in urban fighting. Inside were 3 wooden mannequins clothed in utilities and Kevlar helmets, 2 of them wearing fragmentation vests without ballistic inserts. They were placed in various positions within the structure in the midst of typical office furniture. The mannequins are concealed by the walls, but are they covered? The test was conducted over several days. The weapons included an M9 pistol, 12-gauge shotgun, AK-47 assault rifle, M16 rifle, M249 squad automatic weapon, M40A1 sniper rifle, M240G medium machine gun, M250 caliber heavy machine gun, M82 special application scoped rifle, M203 40mm grenade launcher, and an M67 fragmentation grenade. As a group, these weapons fired single rounds and bursts against the different types of walls concealing the mannequins. This video shows the results and also includes previous similar tests using a Mark 44 30mm chain gun and the shoulder-launched multi-purpose assault weapon, or SMA, against several types of barriers. A 9mm pistol was fired to show its effect on interior walls and adjoining rooms. A 3-round burst shot through an open door, went through an interior sheetrock wall at a 45-degree angle, passed through a mannequin without fragmentation vest, and lodged in a metal desk organizer. Even at a 45-degree angle, the burst of AK-47 rounds penetrated the brick exterior wall from an angle of 45 degrees, again throwing up a spray of dangerous fragments as they embedded themselves in the rear wall of the first room. The AK-47 easily penetrated plywood, cinder block, and brick exteriors at 0 and 45 degrees. The rounds generated secondary brick and block missiles as they entered and, in many cases, passed through the test structure. An M16 rifle was tested against the 3 building facades. A single M16 round, fired from straight on, passed through the plywood exterior wall, through a metal bookcase, through a mannequin with its fragmentation vest, and through an interior wall into a second room where it lodged in the rear wall. A burst of M16 rounds went through the plywood exterior, a mannequin with fragmentation vest, and penetrated into the rear second room, where they went through a metal cabinet and into a mannequin without fragmentation vest. As they exited the mannequin, the rounds dispersed into a 5-foot area in the rear wall of the second room. Three 3-round bursts from the M16 fired directly at the cinder block wall penetrated the blocks but did not enter the room beyond. A burst of M16 fire penetrated the brick wall from straight on, generating a spray of secondary projectiles before lodging in the rear wall of the front room. A single M16 round, fired from an angle of 45 degrees, penetrated the plywood exterior, passed through a mannequin and its fragmentation vest, and entered the second room, where it passed through a second mannequin without a vest and lodged in the wall of the second room. A burst of M16 rounds from 45 degrees penetrated the plywood wall, went through the mannequin with a fragmentation vest, and penetrated into the second room. A burst of M16 fire directed against the cinder block exterior wall from 45 degrees was unable to penetrate the wall. And a burst of M16 rounds from 45 degrees was also unable to penetrate the brick exterior wall. M16 single rounds and bursts were highly effective against plywood walls from any angle, causing interior damage, including penetration of fragmentation vests worn by mannequins. An M16 burst penetrated the brick wall from straight on, but not from 45 degrees. Bursts were unable to penetrate cinder block from any angle, but it is expected that repeated impacts in the same location would eat through the block. The M249 squad automatic weapon was tested against the structure. A burst of M249 rounds fired from straight on penetrated the plywood exterior wall. After passing through the bookcase and the mannequin's fragmentation vest, the rounds lodged in the rear wall of the first room. One round bounced off a helmet near the point of entry. An M249 burst fired straight at the cinder block wall, penetrated the wall, and kicked up a spray of secondary projectiles. The rounds passed through the mannequin and its fragmentation vest before lodging in the rear wall of the first room. Next, an M249 burst was fired directly at the brick wall. A few rounds penetrated the wall, breaking off secondary brick missiles that lodged in the rear wall of the front room, along with the rounds. Serious or possibly lethal wounds could occur if personnel were in the line of fire.
3, 2, 1.
When the angle was shifted to 45 degrees, a burst of M249 fire easily penetrated the plywood exterior wall. The rounds passed through a mannequin and its fragmentation vest, went through the rear wall of the first room, and then exited the structure through the side and rear walls of the second room. Rounds from an M249 burst failed to penetrate the cinder block wall from an angle of 45 degrees. Also from an angle of 45 degrees, a burst of M249 fire was unable to penetrate the brick exterior wall. However, with this and other smaller caliber weapons, it is expected that with continued hits, the rounds would eventually eat through the walls and make their way into the rooms beyond. From straight on, the M249 was effective against the plywood and cinder block walls, but less effective against the brick wall. From an angle of 45 degrees, M249 bursts passed through the plywood wall, but did not penetrate the cinder block or brick walls. A single shot from the M40A1 sniper rifle was directed against the plate glass window to indicate obvious danger when fighting in these conditions. From straight on, an M40A1 round penetrated the plate glass and passed through the left cheek of the mannequin, exiting the rear of the mannequin's Kevlar helmet. The round continued into the wall and furniture of the second room and passed completely through the structure. The M240G medium machine gun fired bursts of rounds against the test structure. A 10-round burst fired from straight on passed through the plywood exterior wall and then penetrated a bookcase and mannequins wearing fragmentation vests. The mannequins were knocked back 3 to 4 feet as some of the rounds continued into the second room, where they passed through a mannequin without armor before exiting through the rear wall of the structure. An M240 burst fired directly at the brick wall, made a 2-inch entry hole in the wall as the rounds ate their way through the brick and continued through the entire structure. Some rounds penetrated a wall locker and lodged in the rear wall. Any personnel in the line of fire would have incurred serious or lethal wounds. An M240 burst was fired directly at the cinder block wall. The rounds ate their way through the block, making a 2.5-inch entry hole in the wall. The rounds created secondary missiles from the back side of the block wall. Projectile fragments penetrated the neck of a mannequin wearing a fragmentation vest. Secondary missiles lodged in the rear wall of the first room. There was no penetration into the second room. Fired from an angle of 45 degrees, an M240 burst passed through the plywood wall and a mannequin with fragmentation vest. The rounds continued into the second room, where they exited the structure with a large dispersion pattern. Rounds from the M240 fired at the cinder block wall from 45 degrees passed through the exterior and interior walls to exit at the rear of the structure. Not all rounds of an M240 burst fired from 45 degrees were able to penetrate the brick exterior. One that did passed through a mannequin with a vest and continued into the second room, where it went through a desk organizer before exiting the structure through a rear wall. Bursts of M240 medium machine gun fire were able to penetrate all exterior walls and cause damage within the test structure. At a firing angle of 45 degrees, the brick exterior wall offered some resistance to penetration. The M2HB 50 caliber heavy machine gun was fired directly against the cinder block and brick walls. At 0 degrees, an M2HB burst went straight through the cinder block wall and everything beyond, leaving large holes in all the walls and causing severe damage to any object in its path. Another burst of M2HB rounds produced large holes in the brick wall, showering fragments into the first room. Projectile holes in the rear wall of the room indicated that the rounds were tumbling after penetrating the brick wall. The rounds continued through the entire structure, leaving large holes in the walls. At 45 degrees, an M2HB burst penetrated the block wall with similar results. The rounds passed through the first room, showering it with fragments. They went through the back two rooms, passing through anything in their path, leaving large holes in the walls and furniture before exiting the structure. A burst of M2HB rounds penetrated the brick wall, went through a mannequin with fragmentation vest, and showered fragments into the first room. The rounds and fragments passed through the second room, creating a large dispersion before exiting the rear wall of the structure. Bursts of M2HB 50 caliber fire at 0 and 45 degrees blasted through both brick and block facades and continued through the entire structure, leaving heavy damage in its wake. An M82 50 caliber special application scope rifle was also tested. A single round from the M82 fired directly at the plywood wall penetrated the wall and passed through a mannequin without fragmentation vest. The round ripped through the torso of the mannequin before exiting the rear of the structure. The fragmentation vest would have had little effect on the results due to the terminal effect of the projectile. The M203 40mm grenade launcher using an M433 high-explosive dual-purpose HEDP round was tested with direct shots against the three types of walls. An M203 round struck the plywood wall 4 feet from the bottom and created a 10 to 14-inch hole at the point of contact. Secondary fragments entered the front room. A single fragment, believed to be the small shape charge jet at the front of the fuse, passed through the entire structure. An M203 round penetrated the cinder block wall about 3 feet from the base. The shape charge jet passed through the first room, entered the second room where it lodged in a metal desk. No secondary missiles were observed entering the room. The shape-charged jet and an M203 round penetrated the brick wall about 4 feet from the base, sending many secondary missiles into the front room. Fragments embedded themselves in the rear wall of the room. The M203, using M433 high-explosive dual-purpose HEDP rounds, penetrated all 3 facades, sending plywood and brick fragments into the rear wall of the first room. M67 high fragmentation grenades were placed in the structure and remotely detonated. An M67 grenade set off in the center of the front room blew out windows, pulled up the plywood floor, and peeled sheetrock walls away from their studs. All areas of the room were hit by fragments, with the mannequins receiving many hits. fragments penetrated into the second room. This damage would have increased greatly had there been a roof to contain and concentrate the blast. A second grenade set off in a smaller rear room had a similar effect. The mannequins, one with a fragmentation vest and the other without, and furniture received a high number of hits. Some of the larger fragments penetrated the fragmentation vest, and more fragments penetrated areas not protected by the fragmentation vest. The mannequin without a vest received a high number of hits. Fragments impacting the mannequins could have been lethal, and again, a roof would have greatly intensified the blast. M67 grenades produced heavy damage in the test rooms, damage that would have been significantly increased had a roof contained the blast pressure. The Mark 44 30mm chain gun is the weapon of choice for the Marine Corps' advanced amphibious assault vehicle. Here, the gun is fired from 1,000 yards against an 8-inch double-reinforced concrete wall with plywood sidewalls. The room has target mannequins with body armor. Rounds detonated in the front wall, sending secondary missiles from the wall and round fragments into the room. Some fragments exited the rear wall of the structure. Against a brick and cinder block wall, the 30mm rounds detonated in the wall, sending secondary missiles from the wall into the room and fragments from the rounds through the rear wall. Fired against a bunker, multiple 30mm rounds penetrated through the bunker, destroying the impact point. The 30mm chain gun effectively penetrates reinforced concrete walls, combination brick and cinder block walls, and sandbag bunkers at ranges up to 1,000 yards. The SMAW is a man-portable 83mm rocket system for use against bunkers, urban targets, and light armor, with ranges up to 500 meters or about 540 yards. Here, SMAW is fired against a triple brick wall from 250 meters or about 270 yards. The warhead blows a 14-inch diameter hole in the wall and dispenses blast overpressure and secondary missiles from the brick into the area behind the wall. Fired against a tank, the small rocket puts a 10-inch diameter hole above the tracks, sending secondary missiles and blast overpressure inside, which could in turn cause secondary detonation of ammunition and fuel. Here, SMAW is fired against a sandbag bunker from 250 meters or about 270 yards. The bunker consisted of 6x6-inch timbers bolted together, with 2x2-inch timbers for the roof and covered with multiple layers of sandbags. The small warhead penetrates the sandbags and detonates against the timbers. The blast overpressure completely destroys the bunker. Different weapons and different types of structures will produce different results, but these limited tests show conclusively that both smaller and larger caliber weapons are able to penetrate urban-type walls and reach the personnel behind them. As Marines train to fight more effectively in cities, the most likely battlegrounds of the future, one of the most valuable lessons they can learn is that concealment does not equal cover.